Hello, everyone, and welcome to Teachly University. And welcome to my lecture, Make the Future Your Ally, How to Use Chance to Build an Ideal Future. And this is an exciting lecture because really we're going to be talking about world building and how we can use the element of chance and risk taking to be able to build a better life and to create and experience new opportunities that I think maybe we've never recognized before with our old way of thinking. So I want to start with a quote from Victor Hugo, who said, "There is nothing like a dream to create the future." And I love the quote because I think there's nothing more exciting than moving and being deliberate or moving towards the direction of your dreams and being able to create the life that you want. And I believe one of the biggest frustrations and anxieties that plague so many people is that they live based on the experiences of the past while dreading the future. And that's why I created the title for this lecture, How to Make the Future Your Ally. Because instead of making it your enemy, you want to use it as leverage so that you can build a better future for yourself and realize that we only have so much time on this earth and that we want to make the most of it and move it in the direction of where it is that we want to go. And I think what really drives us, because of the fact that we only have so much time on this earth, that the element of risk taking and of chance is what really drives and motivates so many people. Because when you think about it, if we knew when and how all of our dreams were going to come true, all of our desires and things we want to accomplish, if we knew they were going to happen with absolute certainty, then life would be pretty boring and there wouldn't really be any motivation for us to take deliberate actions in the direction of where we want to go. But life isn't really like that. We don't know when and how something is going to happen, which is why so many of us take risks and are excited by the element of chance. There's something really exciting about not knowing when something that we want is going to happen. And when it does happen, it becomes a surprise and we become shocked, and it actually creates this emotional connection that we have to continue to move in the direction of where we want to go and to continue to take risks, and motivates us because of the emotional intensity behind that event that occurs without us knowing how it happened. And that's the element of chance. And we're going to explore in this lecture of the balance between probability and analyzing data and using information from our external environment, blending that with the element of chance and synchronicity and not knowing when and how something is going to happen. So, to quote Peter Bernstein from his book Against the Gods, The Remarkable Story of Risk, the real trouble with this world of ours is not that it is an unreasonable world, nor that it is a reasonable one. The commonest kind of trouble is that it is nearly reasonable, but not quite. Life is not an illogicality, yet it is a trap for logicians. It looks just a little more mathematical and regular than it is. Its exactitude is obvious, but its inexactitude is hidden. Its wildness lies in wait. So this is a great book, by the way, I recommend, Against the Gods, A Remarkable Story of Risk, because I think what Bernstein is discussing here in this quote is that behind the rationality in the linear thinking of life, or linear being of cause and effect, that if you do this, this is going to happen. Life is not really like that. Behind the rationality and the logic and of the study of statistics and data and information that we have available to us, there's this wildness underneath the surface. There's this mystery and this inexactitude of that. Really, it's difficult to predict, especially on an individual level, of when and how something is going to happen. That there's no matter how much due diligence you practice, no matter how careful you are to minimize risk, whenever you're willing to take a chance on something, whether it's in starting a business, a relationship, applying to a college, or any other risk for that matter, or on a national or on a larger level, whether a nation decides to go to war or decides to change their economic policies, whatever that is, with chance is always the risk of success and failure. There's no exactitude, meaning that nothing is a sure thing. There's a wildness underneath the surface of things that happen without us really understanding why. So, without chance, without this inexactitude, we wouldn't be living in the world that we live in today. The reason why we live in such an advanced society today, the reason why we have all these amazing products and services and luxuries that were unthinkable probably 30 years ago is because innovators, entrepreneurs, and other leaders in different fields in politics, in business, in spirituality and religion and technology or whatever that is, in all these different fields, they were willing to take chances and risk to be able to build a better world that we live in today. If we didn't bother taking risk, or if we knew when and how things were going to happen, if there was no drive or motivation, then we would still be living in a gregarian society uh, that we were found ourselves in back in the late 19th or early part of the 20th century. We wouldn't be in this advanced civilization that we live in today. And this is not to say there aren't any problems and there aren't any cons with living in this modern world, but there sure as hell are a lot of benefits and opportunities that exist in living in this world today. And that would not have happened without motivation that is driven by chance and risk taking. So when it comes to risk taking, I show you this image of this coin here. Risk and time are two sides of the same coin. And what does that mean? Well, for us to understand risk taking and chance, we have to understand how we use risk and time as a way to make decisions and to decide whether or not we're going to take a chance on something. So let's say, for example, we decide we're going to invest 10,000 of our hard-earned dollars in this startup company, maybe that develops cryptocurrency or something like that. We'll use it as a generic example. But we found out also on the same day that tomorrow the world was going to explode, right? So basically, because there's very little time for us to take advantage of this opportunity or this risk that we're taking or the chance that we're taking of success, then there's really no motivation because there is no time because, well, as I said, the universe, the world is going to explode tomorrow. So there's really no point in taking that or making that investment in that startup. But thankfully, hopefully, right, the world's not going to explode tomorrow. So we're going to have time and we're going to use time to our advantage so that by knowing that if we take enough risks, that over time, that the risk will pay off and that this investment, for example, over time can eventually be a worthwhile investment and that we'll get an ample return as a result. Now, that's not always the case. So, the risk is that we put up money for this startup and we lose a big portion of our capital because the company goes under. Or maybe the owner decided to embezzle the money, the funds, or was unethical. There's things that maybe we don't see or red flags and things that happened that we never really became aware of until it was all over. And I think this leads to my quote from Nassim Taleb, who said that probability is not a mere computation of odds on the dice or more complicated variance. It is the acceptance of the lack of certainty in our knowledge and the development of methods for dealing with our ignorance. We can have all the information made available to us. We can have all the data, we can practice the due diligence, we can try to minimize our risk as much as possible. But the fact is that we're not going to, consciously, we can only be aware of so much information in a given moment. We can only be aware of so much information. There's things that we're not going to see. There's going to be unknowns, things that are happening underneath the surface that we're not aware of, that we won't become aware of till after the fact when the risk or the chance that we took on something, whether it's an investment, a relationship, a business, a career, or any other chance that we took, we're not going to recognize that the pitfalls that are potentially there that could make that decision we made to take that chance maybe not worthwhile. So there's always the risk of failure, but there's also the possibility of success. In making decisions, maybe that there's opportunities that we also don't see underneath the surface. There's positive things that are there that maybe we don't recognize until after the fact. Again, there's two sides to every coin. There's that balance there. Also the balance of rational and irrational thinking that we're going to explore. So Neil deGrasse Tyson says that when a coincidence seems amazing, and this adds on to Taleb's quote, when a coincidence seems amazing, that's because the human mind isn't wired to naturally comprehend probability and statistics. So there's that ignorance there in that the human mind can only comprehend so much information consciously. And as a result, we don't really understand why coincidences and synchronicities happen. So there is the benefits of using data and using our senses to analyze information coming to us from our external environment. It's important we do that in terms of analyzing our environment so that we can help make decisions. The problem is there is that gray area, meaning that our perceptions and our beliefs don't necessarily aren't necessarily true. Is reality is what it is based on our own viewpoint. And these are things that we have to begin thinking about. Because let's face it, we live in an imperfect world, and many of us have developed self-limiting beliefs that maybe skew our perception of reality. Whether these self-limiting beliefs are that detrimental to our way of thinking, the point is that just because we believe in something doesn't mean it's necessarily true, which means that we have to begin thinking about reshaping our perceptions if we're not getting what it is that we want. So Carl Jung, famous psychologist in the 20th century, discussed in some of his work the element of synchronicity. What is synchronicity? Well, synchronicity could be understood, this is his definition, could be understood as an ordering system by means of which similar things coincide without there being an apparent cause. So they're events that happen in our lives that seem coincidental without us even understanding why they occurred. There was no cause for that event to happen. So let's say, for example, maybe we were deciding again we were interested in investing in that startup that I was talking about. You have $10,000. You want to invest in a startup, but you weren't really sure what startup to invest in. And maybe you went to an event and you met someone who coincidentally was an owner of a startup company who was looking for an investor. You didn't call this person out of thin air. You didn't arrange a meeting. You just happened to meet this person in some party who happened to be an entrepreneur or an owner of a startup who was looking for an investor. Now you can argue, well, there's the law of probability there. And yes, there is element of truth to that. But on an individual level, what are the odds that you were able to think about investing in a startup and it just so happened that you met an owner of a startup company looking for an investor? How do you measure that? Well, that's difficult to do. And Carl Jung adds that there's no rule that is true under all circumstances, for this is the real and not statistical world. Because the statistical method shows only the average aspects, it creates an artificial and predominantly conceptual picture reality. So again, using our senses, analyzing information and data and probability is important, but relying solely on this linear way of thinking only paints a partial picture of the whole world of reality and the universe that we live in. Because as I said before, we have a limited view of the world, and relying solely on information and data and statistics and our circumstances can only give us a very partial, artificial view of the larger picture of the world around us. So Carl Jung adds then that natural laws are statistical truths, which means that they are completely valid only when we are dealing with macro physical quantities. In the real world of very small quantities, prediction becomes uncertain, if not impossible, because very small quantities no longer behave in accordance with the known natural laws. What is Jung discussing here? Well, what he's talking about is on an individual level, every single person is different with different desires, beliefs, and ways of thinking in different circumstances. And because of that, it becomes very difficult to predict on an individual level how and why things happen. And linear thinking becomes much more difficult to understand or implement. Again, something to think about here, that on an individual basis, prediction becomes very difficult. We don't know when and how something is going to happen. And relying solely on our circumstances can be misleading. What does that mean? Well, just because you can't see something doesn't mean that it's not possible or true. And a very good example is, again, let's say maybe to flip the coin here, you are the entrepreneur or investor and you want to create your own company or business. Maybe you want to create a company that makes new smartphones and you have a desire to start this company. but there's nothing in your environment to validate that it is even possible. Maybe you don't have much money, you're not knowledgeable on smartphones or engineering or technology on how to develop these devices. You don't necessarily have any connections in that industry where you can perhaps be able to network and meet people that can help you launch your business, or a number of other factors. There's nothing in your external environment to validate that this is possible. But yet, how often have we seen people who've come um, from backgrounds where they've come from broken families, they've come from abusive relationships, poverty, who've come from nothing to accomplish extraordinary things? Well, how does that happen? Where do they get the insight and the revelation and the motivation to drive them to do what they do? It's the motivation of chance, the motivation of synchronicity, where something can happen without us even realizing that it occurred till after the fact, or that it becomes a surprise when this event occurs, because we don't know when and how something is going to happen. And that is that motivation, that excitement that drives innovation. It is believing in the impossible, and that natural laws don't always apply on an individual level. This cause and effect. But the cause and effect, or to increase the probability of success, and again, there's that paradox there, we need to rely both on the rational and irrational. The rational being that, yes, sometimes, yes, we have to acknowledge our problems and our circumstances in the world around us, in judging whether or not it's worth pursuing something. But on the flip side, we are the only ones that can determine what is possible or impossible. It is up to us to make that decision. And again, then being deliberate in moving in the direction of where it is that we want to go. So instead of fearing the future, use the future as your ally and begin to consciously create the life you want by taking enough calculated risks that move you in the direction of your desires. Be specific about what it is that you want and build your future. Get specific about what it is that you want and use the information made available to you to help create that world. There's tons of information out there now, thanks to the internet and social media. There's so much information at your fingertips that you could use to be able to build knowledge and use new and develop new references that you can revert to, that can give you the confidence in knowing that you can accomplish a particular goal. But at the same time, also acknowledging the element of chance, that we don't know when and how something is going to happen. That there's a risk of failure, but we shouldn't even be looking at it as failure, but just a lack of results. Now, we're not getting the results that we want when we want it. That's all it is. And when we change our perception of what success and failure is then, and when we change our perception of what our problems really mean to us, and whether or not they're even problems at all, that changes our entire world in our perception of it. So if you like this video, I highly recommend you subscribe to my YouTube channel. I also recommend you visit my website at teachlyuniversity.com, where you can view all my courses and online lectures. And you can also subscribe to my email list, where you get the latest information and news and events related to Teachly University. So thank you so much for watching this lecture, and I'll see you in the next lecture.